Mark Rogers, TV, and last word on sports on the SEC this afternoon in the big matchup between Alabama and Mississippi State. The Tide is dominant. Dominant on defense, dominant in the running game, and they have special players. The recruiting rankings will bear this out, and what we saw this afternoon is a prime example, especially one player on offense, one player on defense. Yes, there are more than that, certainly, especially when you look at the Bama front seven, maybe the best in college football this season and for several seasons going backwards. So check out the D-tackle play. We saw what we saw last week in Tuscaloosa against Leonard Fournette, in which he was not able to even get to the line of scrimmage on most of his carries in gaining 31 yards on 19 carries. And we saw much of the same against Mississippi State today. The Bama front seven, too much for Dak Prescott. Yes, he threw for 300 yards, but 22 of 43, and most of that garbage yardage and yardage between the 20s. So how many times did Mississippi State pass the 50-yard line, get into Bama territory, the fringe of field goal range, and field goal range for Mississippi State much different than some other teams with some issues in field goal kicking from long distance. So Bama did give up some yardage early. Mississippi State played just about a perfect first quarter and a few minutes into the second quarter before the dam broke. So the Bulldogs at one point, 13 minutes into the second quarter, 132 total yards to 34 for Alabama. At one point, it was about a 100-yard advantage. A little bit later, at about 2:15 to 1:15, Mississippi State again could move the ball, throw the ball a little bit to Fred Ross, who caught 8 for 114 on the day. Also, we saw Donald Gray make some big catches. The one in particular was the one big one down the sideline for 54 yards, a beautiful pitch and catch when Prescott laid it right in there, but then they missed the 50-yard field goal. So Mississippi State crossed the 50 multiple times in the first 20 minutes of game time, but couldn't convert against the Alabama defense. And then the Bama defense had it after that and just wouldn't really give up much of anything. 9 sacks for Bama. Of course, Prescott tries to extend plays, and so that accounts for a few of the sacks, but it was just a devastating performance by the Alabama front seven again. And one thing that Alabama has this year that it didn't have last year on defense is secondary play, where it's just covering all over the field. Contested passes all over the field that you don't typically see in college football. You see players running around free in the secondary, wide open receivers. You see more pass breakups with this Alabama secondary and guys like Marlon Humphrey in particular, who was very impressive in this game. All right, Derrick Henry bottled up, first 6 carries, 14 yards. And really for most of the game, even throughout his 22 carries, bottled up for most of them. But special players, we're talking about special players, Derrick Henry, Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley made the one pitch and catch play in which he converted a short first down play, a third down into a first down. Then he made 2 guys miss. Alabama's players at wide receiver were blocking downfield, most notably Kenyon Drake, who unfortunately was hurt just a couple plays later, actually on the kickoff of the Ridley touchdown. But Alabama, just from a standpoint of talent and execution, was all over it in this one. Cyrus Jones, another special player, another guy that hurts teams in special teams. Not necessarily this season has he been big. He's been big in past seasons for Alabama in special teams. Breaks the 69-yarder after Mississippi State had completely dominated the first 17 minutes of game time. And that's a pretty good chunk of time. Cyrus Jones, 69 yards for the punt return. Derrick Henry, 2 long touchdowns. Calvin Ridley, the pitch and catch, and then the just unbelievable video game type moves to get to the end zone, and he picks up the 2 key blocks. So basically, Alabama wins this game on amazing defense and 4 plays offense/special teams. They win the game. Otherwise, they can't move the football. Mississippi State with 7 more first downs, outgained the Tide barely, 393-379. But as we mentioned, the first 17 minutes of game time dominated the game in yardage, and they kept the ball for 7 more minutes. But Alabama with special players, quick strikes, Ridley, Henry, Cyrus Jones, and that devastating front seven that just wouldn't let Dak do his thing running and throwing the football. couldn't get loose, couldn't hurt Alabama as a running quarterback, something we have, of course, seen in years gone by as the one knock on a Nick Saban defense, but not on this day and not recently. Alabama looks like the best football team in the country. They have lost a game, so that's not going to be necessarily reflected in my top 25 or my college football playoff rankings that will be released in the next couple of days. The real ones on Tuesday, of course, and Bama firmly entrenched at number 2, and who knows, may get some number 1 votes by the committee that we won't see, but could be debated within that room. Bama, Mississippi State, the Iron Bowl's coming up in 2 weeks, then the SEC championship game against Florida, which Bama will be a decided favorite based on the way the Gators are playing on offense. Can you imagine the Gators trying to move the ball against this Tide defense the way it looks right now? Can't see it happening. Of course, the Florida State game will be an interesting test because they have a top 5 to 10 defense against that Florida offense that's been scuffling. Bama, Mississippi State, need to hear from you now on Mark Rogers TV.